For years, my adoptive parents dismissed my silent suffering, pretending we were the perfect family, and they never expected a judge to be the one to hand me the hammer. They built a life that looked flawless on the outside. A beautiful home, expensive vacations, and a daughter always smiling for the camera, a living doll for their immaculate dollhouse. But behind our perfect doors, my pain was just an inconvenience, a smudge on their masterpiece of a life. They thought their lies would last forever, that their carefully constructed world was unbreakable, an fortress of wealth and denial. They never foresaw that their greatest secret was buried in their own home, waiting for me. And they definitely never expected me to have the strength to use the truth to bring their world crashing down around them. Before I continue, make sure to subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, comment below, and leave your like. Helps a lot. From the moment they adopted me as a baby, my life felt like an elaborate performance. I was the star of a show I never auditioned for, cast in the role of the grateful adopted daughter. My parents, Richard and Eleanor, were the meticulous directors, and their circle of wealthy friends was the only audience that mattered. Our house was their stage, a huge, sterile modern home with more glass than walls, a place where everything, including me, was perpetually on display. It was the kind of architectural marvel you'd see in a magazine, a cold monument to my mother's impeccable taste and my father's immense money. They were collectors of beautiful things, and I was simply their most prized and most complicated possession. On the surface, it was a life other kids could only dream of. My closet overflowed with designer clothes I never asked for, my summers were a blur of European resorts I didn't care about, and my birthdays were extravagant parties meticulously planned for their friends, not mine. I was surrounded by everything a child could possibly want, except for the one thing I desperately, achingly needed: for someone to actually see me. To Richard and Eleanor, my inner world was just a messy, inconvenient subplot that threatened to ruin the clean narrative of their perfect family. The pain started when I was little, a formless entity that lived inside me. It was a knot in my stomach on the way to school, a tightness in my chest that made it hard to breathe whenever the house filled with guests. By the time I was 12, it had a clinical name: anxiety. But in my house, it was dismissed with a single cutting word: drama. I remember one evening, before one of Eleanor's fundraising galas, my hands began to shake uncontrollably. I couldn't stop them. Eleanor glided over to me, a vision in silk, her smile fixed for the arriving guests. She grabbed my hands, her grip surprisingly tight, her perfectly manicured nails digging into my skin. "Stop it, Amelia," she'd hiss, her voice a venomous whisper that contrasted sharply with her serene expression. "You're being dramatic. There's nothing to be nervous about. Pull yourself together." Richard was worse. His cruelty was colder, more absolute. He just ignored entirely. If I was having a panic attack in my room, hyperventilating on my floor, he wouldn't comfort me. He would simply close the door, shutting out the unpleasant noise as if I were a barking dog, an annoyance to be silenced. His silence was a statement: your pain is not real, and even if it were, it is not welcome here. Their favorite word, the one they wielded like a finely sharpened weapon, was ungrateful. It was their shield and their sword, used to shut me down any time a real, messy emotion bubbled to the surface. I once tried, in a moment of naive courage, to tell them about the deep, gnawing emptiness I felt, this persistent feeling that I was an alien in my own life, that I just didn't belong. Richard leaned back in his expensive leather chair, the picture of condescension, and looked at me over his glasses. "We have given you everything, Amelia," he said, his voice devoid of any warmth. "A beautiful home, a world-class education, a future most people can only dream of. Other children would kill to be in your position. The absolute least you could do is be happy." Happiness wasn't a feeling. It was an order. My sadness was a personal failure, a direct insult to the perfect life they had so generously bestowed upon me. So I learned to perform. I perfected my smile at their parties. I posed for the endless family portraits that lined our cold white walls, and I got perfect grades. I became the daughter they wanted, the one who didn't cause trouble, the one who didn't feel. I learned to have my panic attacks in secret, locking myself in the guest bathroom, the furthest from their rooms, and turning on the shower to drown out the sound of my own gasping sobs. I'd press my face against the cold tile floor, waiting for the terror to pass, then splash my face with cold water, practice a serene smile in the mirror, and walk back out onto the stage, ready for my next scene. It was utterly exhausting, like holding my breath underwater for years on end. With every passing year, my lungs burned more and more. The only place I ever felt any semblance of peace was the attic. It was the one part of the house that wasn't perfect, the only room that was allowed to be flawed. It was dusty and filled with forgotten things. Old furniture shrouded in white sheets like ghosts, boxes of Richard's college textbooks, tangled Christmas lights, and holiday decorations. It was real. It was messy. And up there it was mine. I'd spend countless hours hiding away, reading by the light of a single grimy porthole window, surrounded by ghosts that felt more real and comforting than my own life. I felt a strange kinship with the forgotten junk, like we were all part of a secret club of things that didn't fit into Richard and Eleanor's perfect world. It was my dusty, silent escape from the relentless pressure to be someone I wasn't. I had no idea that this forgotten space, this island of misfit objects, held the very key that would finally unlock my gilded cage. I was 17 when the world my parents had so carefully built began to tremble. It was a rainy Tuesday in October, the kind of bleak gray day that made our glass house feel even colder and more exposed. Downstairs, the familiar clinking of glasses and the dissonant sound of forced laughter signaled that Eleanor was hosting one of her charity lunches. The noise was the usual soundtrack to my isolated life. She had called up to my room earlier, her voice impatient. "Amelia, I need you to find an old silver vase. I think I remember storing it in the attic years ago," she'd said, not even looking up from her phone. "It's in a blue box. Don't make a mess, and for heaven's sake, don't take all day." I was honestly just grateful for the excuse to escape to my sanctuary. The attic smelled of old wood and rain, a scent that always calmed the frantic buzzing in my chest. I navigated the maze of covered furniture and dusty, precariously stacked boxes until I found the blue one she mentioned. But as I lifted it, my foot nudged something tucked away behind an old heavy dresser, something I'd never seen before. It was a small, dark wood chest, not much bigger than a shoebox, with a tarnished brass lock. It felt different from the other discarded items. Felt personal. A wave of curiosity, so strong it was a physical force, washed over me. My heart started pounding, that familiar anxious rhythm, but this time it was mixed with a thrilling, terrifying premonition that I was about to cross a point of no return. My hands were shaking as I carried the chest to the patch of light by the window and fumbled with the lock. It was rusted but not sealed. Clicked open. The first thing I saw was a thick stack of letters, tied together with a faded pink ribbon. The handwriting on the envelopes was delicate and loopy, a script full of hope and grace. Underneath the letters was a small, worn velvet pouch. My fingers trembled as I opened it, and a tiny silver locket fell into my palm. It was cool to the touch, heart-shaped, with a single tiny lily engraved on the front. I pried it open with my fingernail, a sense of dread and destiny warring within me. Inside was a tiny, faded photograph of a young woman with a kind, gentle smile and eyes that were the exact same shade of hazel as mine. On the other side was a picture of a baby, wrapped in a simple hospital blanket. The baby was me. My breath hitched. Picked up the top letter. The paper was so fragile I was afraid it would crumble to dust in my hands. The date on it was from 17 years ago, just a few weeks after I was born. It started, "My dearest Lily." My brain snagged on the name. Lily. My name was Amelia. Shaking, I started to read. "My dearest Lily, I don't know if you will ever read this, but I have to write it. I have to believe that somehow, someday it will find its way to you. They tell me you are going to a good family, a family who can give you everything I can't. They tell me this is for the best, that I'm doing the right thing. But every single part of me, every cell in my body, is screaming that this is wrong. You are a part of me, my little flower. I held you for 5 days. 5 perfect, beautiful days. I counted your fingers and your toes 100 times. I memorized the shape of your face. And now they are coming to take you away. I hope your new parents tell you about me. Please, God, I hope they tell you that you weren't given away because you weren't wanted. You were wanted more than anything in this world. You were loved fiercely from the moment I knew you existed. I am writing this letter, and I will write 1,000 more if I have to, just in case. So that one day you will know the truth. You are loved, my Lily. You are so loved. Your mother, Sarah. Tears were streaming down my face, hot and silent, dripping onto the 17-year-old paper. I read the next letter and the next and the next. There were dozens of them. A letter for every birthday I'd ever had. A letter for my first day of school. For Christmas. For Valentine's Day. They were filled with so much pure love and crushing heartache, with a desperate, palpable longing to know the little girl she'd been forced to give up. She wrote about her life, how she was working 2 jobs and going to night school, slowly, painfully building a future she hoped to one day share with me. She wrote that she sent the letters every year to the adoption agency, begging them to pass them on to my new family, just so I would know. Just so I wouldn't feel abandoned. My adoptive parents, Richard and Eleanor, they had never mentioned any letters. They had never mentioned a woman named Sarah. They had never, ever mentioned the name Lily. They had told me my birth mother was a troubled teenager who couldn't cope and made a sensible choice. They insisted it was a closed adoption, that there was no story to tell, no past to look back on. It was all a lie. My entire life, my entire identity was a lie. The gnawing emptiness I felt, the suffocating anxiety they called drama, it wasn't a flaw in my character. It was a wound. A deep, festering wound they had known about all along and had deliberately, maliciously hidden from me. They didn't just adopt me, they had erased me. They had stolen my name, my story, and the desperate, beautiful love of the woman who had wanted me more than anything. Downstairs, the sound of polite laughter drifted up from the party, and it felt like a slap in the face. I sat there on the dusty attic floor, clutching the truth to my chest, and for the first time in my life, the crushing tightness in my chest wasn't anxiety. It was rage. Pure, cold, liberating rage. The performance was over. And I was about to bring the whole damned stage crashing down. If you're still here with me, don't forget to subscribe, activate notifications, leave your like, and share this video with someone. Walking down from the attic was the longest, quietest walk of my life. I was no longer a ghost in my own house. I was a gathering storm, a reckoning about to break. I clutched the small wooden chest to my body like a shield. The party was winding down. Eleanor was standing by the enormous front door, air-kissing the last of her friends goodbye with fake promises to do this again so soon. She was the picture of effortless grace and social perfection. Richard was by the fireplace, swirling a glass of expensive red wine, looking utterly pleased with his domain. I walked right into the middle of the cavernous living room and stopped. The silence was immediate and absolute. Every remaining eye in the room turned to me. Eleanor's perfect smile twitched with annoyance. "Amelia, what on earth are you doing?" she asked, her voice tight, a public warning. "And what is that filthy box? I sent you to find a vase." I ignored her and stared straight at Richard, my heart hammering against my ribs. I placed the chest on the gleaming marble coffee table between them. The soft thud echoed in the huge, silent room. "I think you know what this is," I said. My voice was eerily calm, a calm that precedes a hurricane. Richard's face, usually so impassive and controlled, flickered with a flash of pure, undisguised panic. "Amelia, this is not the time or the place for your dramatics. For 17 years it's never been the time or the place." I shot back, my voice gaining strength, fueled by years of suppressed pain. "You built this entire life, this entire family, on a mountain of lies. You told me my name was Amelia. But my real name is Lily." There was a collective, horrified gasp from the few remaining guests. Eleanor's face went bone white. "Don't be ridiculous," she snapped, her carefully constructed composure finally shattering into 1,000 pieces. "You're being hysterical. You're just trying to make a scene." "A scene?" I laughed, a raw, bitter sound I didn't recognize as my own. You've directed every scene of my entire life. But you left out the most important character. I threw open the lid of the chest and pulled out the letters, the faded pink ribbon like a splash of blood against the sterile white room. My mother. My real mother. Her name is Sarah. And she's been writing to me my whole life. I held up a letter, waving it in the air. She loved me. She wanted me. She begged the agency to give these to you. She begged you to tell me my story. But you buried it. You buried her. You buried me. My voice finally broke on the last word, the rage giving way to a tidal wave of 17 years of grief. Richard's face contorted into a mask of pure fury. That is enough, he boomed, taking a threatening step toward me. You are an ungrateful, delusional child. We gave you everything. You gave me things. I screamed, instinctively stepping back from him. You gave me clothes and vacations and a name that isn't even mine. You never gave me the truth. You knew I was in pain, you knew I felt broken and lost, and you let me believe it was my fault. You stood by and watched me suffer when you had the cure, the truth, right here in this box. The last of the guests scrambled out the door, desperate to escape the implosion of the perfect family. Soon it was just the three of us. The battle lines were drawn in the wreckage of their lies. Eleanor tried a different tactic, her voice becoming soft and manipulative, the way she spoke when she wanted a large donation from someone. Sweetheart, you don't understand. We did it to protect you. Your birth mother, she was unstable. We thought a clean break would be better for you. Protect me? I asked, my voice dripping with disbelief. You lied to protect yourselves. You lied to protect this perfect, sterile little world you built. A daughter with a messy past and a poor mother didn't fit your aesthetic, did she? It was easier to just pretend she didn't exist. It was easier to tell me I was being dramatic than to admit I was grieving a mother you stole from me. The fight that followed was the ugliest night of my life. They threw every accusation they could at me. I was mentally unwell, I was twisting their good intentions, I was selfish. They tried to take the box, but I clutched it to my chest as if it were a vital organ. By dawn I was exhausted, but something inside me had hardened into steel. They were never going to tell the truth. They were never going to see the cruelty of what they had done. The next day, during my lunch break at school, I walked into the cluttered, welcoming office of the school counselor, Ms. Albright. I placed the chest on my lap and, for the first time, I told someone the whole story from beginning to end. I didn't cry. I just spoke with a cold, hard clarity that surprised even me. I showed her the letters. I showed her the locket. When I finished, she looked at me with a profound compassion I had been starved for my entire life. Amelia. Lily, she said softly, correcting herself with a small, kind smile. This is a profound deception. What they did to you is a form of serious emotional abuse. She told me I had options. She mentioned legal aid services and a word I had never even considered for myself. Emancipation. Emancipation. Freedom. The word took root in my mind and grew with astonishing speed. I didn't want their money or their cold, perfect house. I wanted my life back. I wanted my name. I wanted the right to find my mother. With Ms. Albright's help, I contacted a lawyer at the Legal Aid Society named Maria. She was fierce and angry on my behalf, and her anger made me feel seen for the first time. She explained that suing for emancipation and to unseal my adoption records would be a brutal, uphill battle. My parents would fight it with everything they had. But, she said, clutching one of the letters were my proof. They were evidence of long-term emotional abuse and deliberate deceit. When my parents received the legal notice, the house transformed from a Cold War into an open war zone. They took my phone and my laptop, cutting me off from the outside world. They hired a team of high-powered, ruthless lawyers. Their strategy became obvious from the first legal filing. Paint me as a disturbed, unstable, and vindictive teenager trying to extort money from her loving, long-suffering parents. They were going to try and make me seem as crazy as they'd always told me I was. But they didn't get it. The girl they were fighting wasn't the same girl who used to cry on the cold bathroom floor. That girl was gone. In her place was a young woman who had finally found her name. And she wasn't going to let them take it from her ever again. The courtroom was just as cold and intimidating as I had imagined. My parents sat at the opposing table, looking every bit the perfect, wounded victims. Eleanor, in a prim and proper navy suit, dabbed at her dry eyes with an embroidered handkerchief. Richard sat ramrod straight, his face a carefully crafted mask of fatherly concern and deep hurt. Their expensive lawyer radiated a smug confidence that made my stomach churn. For a fleeting second, that old, familiar fear crept back in. Who would ever believe a teenager over these two powerful, respectable adults? My legal aid lawyer, Maria, gave my hand a firm squeeze under the table. "Just tell your truth, Lily," she whispered, using my real name. "That's all you have to do." Their lawyer went first, painting a masterful, sickening picture of two loving parents who had rescued a child from a dismal fate and given her a life of unimaginable privilege. He called me a troubled, emotionally volatile teenager with a well-documented history of dramatic episodes and attention-seeking behavior. He was twisting my pain, my legitimate grief, into a weapon against me, just as they always had. Then my parents testified. Eleanor spoke in a soft, trembling voice about how they loved me more than life itself, and only ever wanted to protect me from a painful past. Then it was Richard's turn. He was firm, authoritative, and utterly convincing. When Maria cross-examined him about the letters, he looked the judge squarely in the eye and lied without flinching. "We may have received one or two letters early on from a clearly unstable individual. We consulted with child psychology professionals who advised us that any contact would be deeply detrimental to our daughter's well-being. Our only concern then and now was protecting Amelia." My heart sank. They were so polished, so believable. It was their word against mine. Then it was my turn. I walked to the witness stand, my legs feeling like lead. I looked at the judge, an older woman named Alani Davis, who had kind eyes but a stern, no-nonsense expression. Maria gently had me tell the court about my life, about the pervasive anxiety and the soul-crushing emptiness. My voice shook at first, but then as I spoke my truth, it grew stronger. I told them about the panic attacks, about being called ungrateful, about hiding in the bathroom so no one would hear me cry. "Why did you think you felt this way?" Maria asked. "Because they told me it was my fault," I said, finally looking directly at my parents. "They told me I had nothing to be sad about. I thought I was broken." Maria had me read one of the letters out loud. It was the one for my 7th birthday. My voice cracked as I read Sarah's words, her beautiful, simple hope that I was happy and that I loved to read. But Maria wasn't done. She had one more card to play. "Your Honor," she said, her voice ringing with confidence. "The defense claims that contact with the birth mother would have been detrimental because she was, in their words, unstable. We would like to call a rebuttal witness. We call Dr. Sarah Connell to the stand." My head snapped up. Richard and Eleanor froze, their masks of composure shattering. A woman stood up from the back of the courtroom. She was older than the photo in the locket, with faint lines around her eyes, but they were the same kind, gentle eyes. It was my mother. Sarah, Dr. Sarah Connell, was a respected child psychologist. She testified with a quiet, unshakable dignity that filled the room. She explained that she had been a scared 19-year-old from a poor background, but she was never unstable. She had placed me for adoption with the legally documented understanding that it would be an open adoption, allowing for letters and photos. She had sent letters every year as agreed. Then came the first twist for the court. Maria presented a copy of a brutal letter from the Sterling's lawyer, demanding she cease all contact immediately, or they would file for a restraining order against her for harassment. It was the smoking gun, proving they hadn't just passively received the letters but had aggressively, cruelly cut my mother off. Then Maria turned her attention back to Richard. "Mr. Sterling," she said, "you testified that your only concern was Amelia's, or rather Lily's, well-being. Is that correct?" "Absolutely," Richard said, indignant. You also testified that you did not know Sarah Connell, that she was just an unstable individual. That is correct, he said. Maria then placed a new document on the projector. It was a university course roster from 20 years ago. Your Honor, this is a roster for an introductory economics class at Northgate University. As you can see, Richard Sterling is listed as the teaching assistant for the course. And if you look here, she said, pointing, you'll see the name of one of his students, Sarah Connell. The courtroom was silent. This was the real plot twist, the one that changed everything. Maria continued, her voice cold and precise. Mr. Sterling, isn't it true that you knew Sarah Connell? That she was a promising student in your class whom you pursued, and who rejected your advances? Isn't it true that years later, when you and your wife decided to adopt and her name came across your desk, you saw a chance for the ultimate revenge? An opportunity to take her child, erase her existence, and possess the one thing she loved most in the world. Richard was as white as a sheet, speechless for the first time in his life. It wasn't about aesthetics. It was a personal, calculated, monstrous act of revenge. He hadn't just hidden my past to protect his image. He'd stolen my life to settle a decades-old score. Judge Davis took off her glasses, rubbed her tired eyes, and then looked directly at Richard and Eleanor with an expression of pure contempt. I have been a family court judge for 20 years, she began, her voice low but carrying to every corner of the room. I have seen tragedy and I have seen cruelty. But rarely have I seen a deception so calculated, so profoundly selfish, and so emotionally destructive as this. She turned to them, her eyes blazing. You did not do this to protect your daughter. You did this to feed your own vanity and, in your case, Mr. Sterling, to enact a petty, cruel revenge. You treated this child not as a human being with a history and a heart, but as a possession to be curated. You took her natural grief and you told her she was dramatic. You told her she was ungrateful. You told her she was broken. You were wrong. She was not broken. She was grieving. And you, she said, her voice filled with disgust, were the source of her pain. Tears were now streaming down my face, not of sadness but of pure, absolute validation. Every word from the judge was a balm on a 17-year-old wound. The law considers emotional abuse grounds for a change in circumstances, Judge Davis continued, her voice like steel. And what I have heard today is a textbook case. The constant invalidation, the gaslighting, the malicious and deliberate withholding of her own identity. It is unforgivable. She looked at me then, and her entire expression softened. Miss Lily Connell, she said, using my real name with purpose. The court grants your petition for emancipation. You are, from this moment, legally an adult, free to make your own decisions. Then she turned back to Richard and Eleanor, her face hard as stone once more. Furthermore, the court orders the immediate and full unsealing of your adoption records. You have a right to your history. You have a right to your family. You have a right to your name. She looked at them one last time. You came into this court masquerading as victims, the judge said, her voice filled with utter contempt. But the only victim here is the child whose spirit you tried so desperately to break. You failed. Let the record show that this court finds your actions to be morally reprehensible. We are adjourned. The sharp, loud crack of her gavel was like a thunderclap. It was the sound of my cage breaking. It was the sound of my new life beginning. I walked out of that courthouse into the bright, blinding afternoon sun, no longer Amelia Sterling, the sad, performing girl in the glass house. I was Lily Connell, a free woman. Sarah was waiting for me on the steps. We didn't say anything at first. Words felt too small. We just stood there, two strangers bound by a story that had finally, painfully, been told. Then she opened her arms and I walked into them. It wasn't a movie-perfect reunion. It was awkward and tearful and messy and profoundly, overwhelmingly real. It was a beginning. My life isn't a fairy tale now. There are 17 years of pain and trauma that don't just vanish with a judge's verdict. Building a relationship from a foundation of old letters and new truths is a slow, careful, and sometimes painful process. But for the very first time, my life is my own. The suffocating knot of anxiety that lived in my chest for as long as I can remember has finally started to unwind. The deep, hollowing emptiness is slowly being filled, not with expensive things or empty praise, but with truth. I learned that my pain was never a character flaw. It was a compass, insistently pointing me toward the truth I was denied. And sometimes the most loving family isn't the one you're given, but the one you have the courage to fight for and find. Thank you for listening to my story. Please subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, comment below, leave your like, and share this video with others.